It was a crisp morning in New York City, the kind of day where the chill in the air couldn't quite hide the buzz of the city below, the feeling that something was about to happen. The cameras rolled and the lights blazed down as the crew prepped for the morning's broadcast of The View. To the millions watching at home, it seemed like just another predictable episode. Another round of opinions, gossip, and hot takes from the hosts who had become fixtures in their lives. But today, things were different. Today, the show was about to unravel in a way no one had ever seen before. Behind the scenes, Karoline Leavitt sat quietly in her dressing room. A former political aide with a fiery personality, Karoline had been thrust into the spotlight after joining The View as a guest commentator. She'd become an unlikely voice on the liberal-leaning panel, her sharp wit and unflinching honesty making her both a crowd favorite and a controversial figure. But it wasn't just her opinions that had made headlines recently. It was her insider knowledge of The View's dirty little secrets. For weeks, Karoline had been sitting on a bombshell, something that could shake the very foundation of the show. The kind of thing that, if it came to light, would make people question everything they thought they knew about the media world. Yet, despite the tension in the air, she had kept quiet, waiting for the right moment. But today was different. Karoline knew that she couldn't hold back anymore. She had seen the behind-the-scenes chaos, the manipulation, the secret deals, the egos clashing. It was all about to come out. As the camera crew ran through their final checks, Karoline's mind raced. Would she drop the truth today? Would she expose it all? Or would she keep her secrets hidden just a little longer? Playing the game like everyone else, her gaze flickered to the mirror, where her reflection stared back at her with an intensity that reflected her inner turmoil. This was her moment, her chance to reveal everything. But before she could make a decision, the sound of the producer's voice came through her earpiece. It was time. The show was about to begin. The tension in Karoline's chest tightened. She took a deep breath, straightened her blazer, and stepped out into the chaos that was The View. Little did anyone know, chaos was about to erupt on live TV. The opening credits rolled, the familiar theme song blasting through the studio speakers as the audience cheered. Karoline's heart beat a little faster, a cocktail of excitement and nerves swirling inside her. She was just one of many faces on The View today. But today was different. Today, the usual banter, the easy back and forth between the hosts, felt like a mask. Beneath the surface, something darker simmered, and Karoline knew she was the only one who could expose it. As the cameras started rolling, the show kicked off as it always did, with the hosts exchanging pleasantries and catching up. Karoline sat between two of the show's mainstays, Whoopi Goldberg, the seasoned veteran, and Joy Behar, the sharp-tongued comedian whose political takes could be just as biting as her jokes. The dynamic between them was always electric, but today, Karoline couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The first topic on the table was one of the usual hot-button issues: political drama, the latest in Washington, and the usual riff on social media outrage. Karoline was ready. She had her talking points, her opinions perfectly rehearsed. She had played the game before, nodding along, adding her voice to the chorus. But today, she felt different. She knew more than just the headlines. She knew the behind-the-scenes chaos, the way The View had spun its narratives, how certain voices were silenced or pushed forward, depending on the agenda of the higher-ups. And then, as if on cue, it happened. Whoopi, in her usual calm demeanor, turned to Karoline and asked a question that seemed innocent at first, a simple prompt to offer her thoughts on a controversial political figure. But as Karoline opened her mouth to speak, a small but deadly spark ignited inside her. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. Without thinking, she veered off script, diving into the very thing that had been eating at her for weeks. "I think we need to address something that's not being said," Karoline began, her voice steady, but firm. "There are things happening here behind the scenes at The View that the public doesn't know about. There's manipulation, there's favoritism, and it's time someone said it out loud." The studio went quiet. The cameras seemed to zoom in on Karoline, her words hanging in the air like a heavy storm cloud. Whoopi's expression shifted, a flicker of unease crossing her face, while Joy's eyes narrowed, an uncomfortable silence settling between them. The audience could feel the tension, the disruption of the carefully curated narrative. It was in that moment, when Karoline dared to speak the unspeakable, that her life on The View would never be the same again. The fallout was immediate. The producers scrambled in the control room, the live audience murmured with confusion, and Karoline's co-hosts exchanged glances, the cracks in their friendly facade beginning to show. Karoline could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air, but there was no turning back now. She had lit the fuse, and it was too late to put the match out. Karoline could feel the weight of every second that followed her explosive words. The silence in the studio was deafening. For a brief moment, it was as if time itself had frozen. Just her, the flashing lights, and the sudden, undeniable truth that had just erupted into the open. But then, as if on cue, the chaos began. Whoopi recovered first, her poised demeanor returning as she smoothly steered the conversation away from the uncomfortable truth Karoline had just dropped. "Well, Karoline, it's always good to have a fresh perspective on things," she said with a forced smile. The audience seemed unsure how to react, some nodding in agreement, others clearly bewildered. Joy, on the other hand, shot Karoline a glance that sent a cold shiver down her spine. There was no pretending that this wasn't a personal hit. Karoline's heart raced as the next segment began, but her mind was elsewhere. Was it too late to take it back? Could she walk those words back and pretend like it never happened? As the show continued, she struggled to maintain her composure, the spotlight now more a curse than a blessing. The producers in her earpiece urged her to stay on message, to be more careful with her words, but Karoline knew there was no going back. Backstage, things were already unraveling. Karoline had barely made it to her dressing room before she was bombarded with messages, angry texts from the higher-ups, calls from the public relations team, and a constant barrage of emails detailing how her unsanctioned outburst had disrupted the flow of the show. Her stomach churned as she read through the messages. She could almost hear the voices on the other end of the line. The thinly veiled threats, the subtle hints that her career on The View could come to a swift and sudden end if she didn't fall in line. But what stung the most wasn't the reprimands or the threats. It was the growing doubt that bubbled up inside her. Was this all a mistake? Had she just risked everything, not just for herself, but for the fragile alliances she had built on set? She thought of Joy's icy stare, the way Whoopi had smoothed over her comments without even acknowledging the truth behind them. Were they just using her to spice up the show, to add a little controversy, without ever intending to let her truly speak her mind? The realization hit her hard. The network wasn't looking for truth. They wanted ratings, drama, spectacle. She had unwittingly become part of the machine, but that only fueled the fire in her belly. If they wanted drama, if they wanted chaos, then she would give it to them. But now, it wasn't just about the show. It was about her own integrity. The more they pushed her down, the more she would rise. And rise she would, though, as she would soon discover, the consequences of her actions would come faster and harder than she had anticipated. The days following Karoline's explosive revelation on The View felt like a blur. The backlash was swift and brutal. Her phone buzzed incessantly, her inbox flooded with half-threatening, half-pitying messages from producers, fellow co-hosts, and industry insiders. The View had a way of making the world seem small, and the whispers about her outburst spread quickly. Some media outlets painted her as a whistleblower, a brave soul willing to expose the ugly truths lurking behind the glitz and glamour of daytime television. Others, however, saw her as a loose cannon, someone who didn't understand the delicate balance of television's carefully orchestrated world. By the end of the week, the network called her into a meeting. She had half expected it, but that didn't lessen the sharp pang of anxiety that gripped her chest as she stepped into the cold, sterile conference room. The table was surrounded by suits, executives who rarely showed their faces on set. Their expressions were unreadable, their voices polite but firm. "We understand your desire to speak your truth, Karoline." One of them, a middle-aged man with a sleek, unflappable demeanor, began. "But The View is a machine, and machines work best when all the parts fit together seamlessly. Your actions have created a disruption we simply cannot ignore. It's not just about the audience anymore. It's about control." For a moment, Karoline felt a wave of panic. The familiar words were coming faster now. Disruption, control, risk. She knew where this was heading. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're giving you two options," the executive continued. "You can apologize, fall back in line, and work through this with a little damage control. Or we can part ways here, and your career with The View ends now." Karoline's blood ran cold. She had never been one to back down, but the weight of what was being asked of her, the apology, the submission, gnawed at her. Her mind raced. She thought about the past few days, the deep sense of betrayal she felt when the show had tried to bury the truth. She thought of the calls she had received from some of her former colleagues, offering support but reminding her that there were lines she shouldn't cross. But then, something clicked. It wasn't just about The View anymore. It wasn't even about the fallout from one interview. It was about the people, the ones who had been manipulated behind the scenes, who had been used for the sake of ratings, their lives twisted into convenient storylines without their consent. Karoline wasn't just fighting for her career, she was fighting for something much bigger than that. Her perspective was shifting. She wasn't just an outsider anymore. She had crossed a line, yes, but now, the line she had crossed was the only thing that could set her free. "I won't apologize," Karoline said, the words slipping out with unexpected clarity. "I won't let you silence the truth. You wanted chaos? Fine. But this isn't about me. This is about the people you've used." The room grew still. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she stood tall. For the first time in days, Karoline felt a sense of control over her destiny. The stakes had never been higher, but neither had her resolve. As the executives exchanged uncertain glances, Karoline stood up and walked out of the room without looking back. Her heart raced, but this time it was with purpose. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. She had made her choice. The truth was out, and it was only a matter of time before the storm it had created came crashing down on everyone involved. The phone calls kept coming. The emails piled up. The public response was split right down the middle. Some praised Karoline for her courage, others called her reckless. But what truly unnerved her was the silence from her co-hosts. Whoopi and Joy, the two women she had shared the stage with, the ones she thought might understand her need to speak out. Neither had reached out. In fact, it felt as though they were avoiding her. The dissonance between what she had expected and what she was now facing stung worse than the backlash. It wasn't just the network or the media she had to contend with anymore. The real battle was happening on set. Karoline could feel the growing tension every time she walked onto the studio floor. The other hosts, though cordial on the surface, were watching her with wariness, as if she might explode again at any moment. The audience, too, felt the shift. What had once been a light-hearted, opinionated talk show had morphed into a high-stakes arena. And Karoline? She was the lightning rod, the one holding the storm in her hands. Then, during the live broadcast of one of the most anticipated episodes, Karoline knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. The producers had picked a topic that was bound to ignite the stage. A controversial figure within the entertainment industry who had recently come under fire for exploiting their power. The moment the discussion started, Karoline could feel the familiar tightening in her chest. This was her chance to speak up once more, to continue to push against the controlled narrative the show was trying to sell. As the topic heated up, Joy spoke first, her usual biting humor masking the deeper, almost defensive energy she projected. Whoopi followed suit, making a quick jab at the figure in question but keeping the tone light. Karoline's mouth went dry. It felt like they were skimming the surface of something that was far more profound and troubling. Then, the moment came. The camera swung her way, and Whoopi, with her usual grace, turned to Karoline. "What do you think, Karoline? We haven't heard from you yet." The weight of the question felt different this time. Karoline wasn't just speaking to fill the silence or to provide an opinion anymore. This wasn't just another segment. It was the moment when everything would either crumble or ignite. The audience leaned in. The tension in the air was palpable. Karoline's pulse thudded in her ears as she gripped the edge of the table. She opened her mouth, and for a moment, everything that had been building inside her, the frustration, the anger, the clarity, poured out. "They don't care about truth," she said, her voice firm, her gaze sharp as she stared directly at Whoopi and Joy. This show, these conversations we're having, it's all controlled. You think we're telling the audience the full story, but we're just another part of the spectacle. We're here to feed them what they want, and I'm done playing along. The room went still. Karoline's words hung heavy in the air, like a confession. The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing every flicker of emotion as the audience at home processed what they were hearing. Behind the scenes, chaos erupted. Producers scrambled to regain control, signaling to cut to a commercial. Break, but Karoline didn't stop. Her voice rose, the truth bubbling out of her in a stream of raw emotion. This is bigger than all of us. It's about the lies we've been complicit in. It's about the people we've silenced to keep the ratings up. The world deserves better than this. And if I'm the one to break the illusion, so be it. Whoopi looked momentarily taken aback, her seasoned composure faltering. Joy, on the other hand, shot Karoline a look that was both cold and calculating. It was clear now. She wasn't just disrupting the show. She was challenging everything about their carefully constructed world. The cameras kept rolling, but it was as if the world outside the studio had faded away. Karoline had crossed a line she could never uncross. And in that moment, she realized something profound. She hadn't just taken control of the narrative. She had become the story. The aftermath of Karoline's outburst was nothing short of explosive. The live broadcast cut to commercial, but the tension on set lingered long after the cameras were off. The producers scrambled, their voices muffled in Karoline's earpiece, urging her to calm down, to backtrack, to smooth things over. But it was too late. The genie was out of the bottle, and there was no putting it back. In the days that followed, the fallout was relentless. The show's producers tried to clean up the mess, putting out a carefully crafted statement that distanced the view from Karoline's comments. But the damage was done. Karoline's name was trending, but not for the reasons anyone had expected. She had become a symbol of defiance, someone who dared to challenge the glossy, polished image of mainstream television. Yet, as the days went on, something unexpected began to happen. The public started to rally behind her. Fans who had once followed The View for its predictable commentary began to see Karoline as a voice of authenticity in a sea of manufactured opinions. She wasn't just some political pundit or media personality. She was a truth-teller, someone unafraid to expose the cracks in the facade. Even her co-hosts, despite their initial wariness, began to come around. Whoopi reached out privately, offering a surprisingly supportive message. "You're brave, Karoline," it read. "I don't always agree with you, but I respect the courage it took to speak your truth." Joy, ever the skeptic, was harder to read. But in a rare moment of candidness, she sent Karoline a note. "I don't always like the way you do things, but I get it. And maybe that's the point. You're shaking things up in ways none of us are willing to." In the end, Karoline's position on The View became tenuous. The network offered her a chance to come back, but only if she agreed to toe the line, to apologize publicly, and to fall in line with their scripted narrative. The offer was tempting, but it was also an ultimatum. Karoline knew the price of silence. She knew what it meant to keep playing the game. And so, she made a choice. She walked away. In a final, decisive move, Karoline left the show, refusing to let herself be boxed in by the very system she had exposed. The public response was mixed. Some saw it as a defeat, others as a victory. But to Karoline, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about standing up for something larger than herself. In the weeks that followed, Karoline's career took unexpected turns. She became a sought-after speaker, her story inspiring others in the media and beyond to push back against the status quo. Her voice grew louder, her influence wider. But more importantly, she found peace in knowing that she had been true to herself, even when it was the hardest thing to do. As she stood before a crowd at a speaking event, the weight of everything she had been through settled in her chest, but with it came a quiet satisfaction. She had faced the storm head-on and emerged stronger, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt silenced. And with a smile that was equal parts defiant and fulfilled, Karoline Leavitt finally said, "Sometimes, the only way forward is to break the rules." And with that, the world was listening.